So we ended up with 9 of us running the London Marathon. We ended up with 40 of us cycling from London to Paris, and we ended up with 30 of us summiting Kilimanjaro.
Wow.
We raised just shy of £200,000 for, it was cancer research at that time, who we still support. But we weren't an official charity. It was just Jamie doing his thing. And then as I was sort of sliding on my heels down Kilimanjaro after summiting, sort of the euphoria wearing off, and as I realised I still had a 3-day trek to get back down the mountain, someone hollered down to me like, "Jamie, what's going on next year? What are the events next year?" I was like, "What? Next year?" He goes, "Well, this can't be it." And on the back of that, Try Life was born. And yeah, we ended up, we've done some amazing things. We've run 5 marathons. We've done an Arctic expedition, husky dogs across the Arctic Circle. We've hosted white-collar boxing events. We've created our own challenges, things like one called Rock and Ride, where we would cycle from London up to Scotland and, attend a music festival and then head back. We've done triple challenges up in the Lake District, where we're kayaking, racing on bikes, and then climbing a mountain all within a 12-hour period. We've done UK 3 Peaks, the Yorkshire 3 Peaks, Snowdon a number of times. And the list goes on. And after a quiet period, after buying the business, moving house, getting married, it felt like a moment to take a breath. We're relaunching it now. So literally next month, we're going to have a full relaunch. And we've got some really exciting things coming up. So as I mentioned before, we've got the Adventure Networking series, which we're going to do maybe twice a year. And that's the dovetail with the business that I'm looking for. But equally, we're going to do a London to Amsterdam bike ride. We're looking at doing the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, the pilgrimage from France through to Spain. So that's something that we've got a lot of interest in. Doing the marathon again, it's a glutton for punishment, I think, there. And we're looking at some what we call big, hairy goals. So we've got Everest Base Camp on there. We've got rowing the Atlantic as part of the world's toughest row. And, we're looking at taking on some really big challenges. But what we're doing there is we're kind of building the team first, because what I've done, I've made the mistake in the past, is that I've said we're doing it on this date and then recruiting is just painful. But what we're doing is sort of, if we can get enough people signed up for the North Pole Trek or for the world's toughest row, then once we hit the right number of people, that will be a greenlit endeavour and we'll go for it from there. So lots of exciting things going on. We'll be doing lots of filming for that. So it's quite media rich. It's got a history of it. We had a full documentary filmed in the first year, had a premiere at the Ritzy Cinema in Brixton. And yeah, it was sort of magical to bring everyone together for something really good and wholesome. So everyone was there raising money for an amazing cause, but they were also sort of taking care of their own health and fitness. People really, there's some really inspiring stories. One of my good friends in the US, she would kindly say that she wouldn't have been in the right shape to climb Kilimanjaro, but she called me up and said, "Jamie, you sort of inspired me to do this." I think she was in her sort of mid-50s at the time. And I was like, wow, that's a big commitment. And she was the first one to get up the mountain. She sort of took hold of her fitness. She got to the very top. She was the first one there. I think she got a T-shirt when she came over from the US for the premiere. Try Life changed my life. And that's quite inspiring stuff. So, we also build a community around the group as well. So, yes, the charity and the business are sort of forging forward together, and that's quite an exciting place to be. So I get to talk about both, when I'm talking about business. And, lots of people want to do good. Sometimes they just need to be given the opportunity. So I always find I'm pushing an open door quite often, and that's great. And yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes next year.
Interesting observation is that through bereavement, so many lives have been touched in a positive way.
It is inspiring. It's not an overused word in this context. That there are other friends as well. It's, the bike ride we did, for example, A lot of these people weren't what they call mammals, right? Middle-aged men in lycra. We were a bit younger then, but they, they weren't cyclists. But we got into the training for that event, and they've carried that on through their lives. And that's 13 years ago we did that, and that's something they've picked up on the back of that. So that again, that feeds into their health and well-being. That feeds into the stories they tell their kids as well. So we're all of an age now where we've got kids growing up, and they see the pictures around the house, of us me and mummy on top of Kilimanjaro together with all our friends. And my boys, they're constantly asking when they can do a challenge, when they can. And what a nice thing to pass down. That if we can, we should. If we can do good, we should. And that I truly believe that. And it's running the charity is not completely altruistic. There is that warm fuzzy feeling you get by doing it. And I don't feel guilty about that. Whereas sometimes maybe at the start I did, but it's like, no, I want to do all these adventures. By doing it for charity, we're raising funds for something that will impact all of us at one point or another, right? So cancer has a shadow that casts over everyone, but we will speed the cure, and that's the hashtag. It's more than the hashtag; that's the mission. We will speed the cure, and like I said, stepping that across into what I do in my day-to-day work as well now, and doing so with the confidence that it positions us as the people we genuinely are. And that's exciting. And sort of the feedback I've got from my network within the sort of built environment has been really positive. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out over the next year or so.
Talk to me about the things that you've learned about yourself from doing those 3 challenges. So I would imagine I've spoken to quite a few people that have done marathons and also the London to Paris, but I've never actually spoken to anyone in detail that's summited Kilimanjaro.
Yeah. So, and this has played out it's a lesson I learned back in 2013 when we did the climb, and I've used it in business, in life. I've used it. It's sort of a framework in my mind that I sort of picked up when I was there. It's quite a long, arduous trek. It's not massively steep, but altitude sickness is a real challenge when you're climbing Kilimanjaro because it's slow and gradual. You should acclimatize. But the problem is when you're in such a large group, you're slower than you should be. So you're exposed at altitude for longer than is recommended. We had a number of people in our group that were close to turning around because they had exposure. We had a couple that really did, right on the last night, really suffer quite badly with the altitude sickness. And so it does become a battle. And the lesson I'd sort of learned and have reflected on since then is that there are times when you think you're done, but the body's always got a bit more to go. Like your mind will give up before your body will. So you'll quit in your head before your feet will stop moving. And you break. It's like anything in business. It's like it's a marathon's a great analogy, right? You run a marathon by putting one foot in front of the other repeatedly for 26.2 miles. And Kilimanjaro really taught me that. I really struggled. I was probably one of the fittest that summer because I was the only one that did all 3 of those events. Everyone else did 1, a few did 2. I did all 3, so I was in great shape. But that, altitude sickness doesn't care about that. There are those that smoked that smoked whose lungs were used to having slightly less oxygen, didn't impact them anywhere near as much as me. And I had this moment on top of the mountain where we were right near this place called Gilman's Point. So you reach the top of the summit, but then you walk round to the actual summit. I'm not sure of the technical term, but you reach the top, and then you walk all the way around the crater. So it's a dormant volcano. So you walk around to that point. And I was, we've been climbing for 5 days. And I was about 20 minutes away. I was like, I'm done. I think I'm done. I sort of sat down and had a princess moment and said, this is, it's just too much. And then the little voice in your head sort of just one step in front of the other. And gradually you build that momentum. And I think I've transferred that to everything. So running a marathon is exactly the same. I've had good and bad. I've done a few now. I've had good and bad experiences in a marathon. I've had the marathons where I've achieved the time I've set out. And I've had marathons where I've pulled a muscle in my back and, I was overtaken with 2 miles to go by a man dressed as a toilet. So I've had both extremes. And even so, with an injured back, trying to run and not get overtaken by any more cartoon characters, one foot in front of the other. And you can definitely apply that to business. You know, I've had days where I think I've cracked it, and I've got days when I think, what the hell am I doing? And when those days hit you, I think you have to just, what's the next right thing? What's that one thing I can do to move forward? So I think I've been able to take those lessons learned and apply them across my life in general, right? Not even just business, not even just the charity, but just life in general. I think, you know, the challenges it can throw up. Sometimes you don't need to look to the horizon. You just look down at your feet and take one step.
I love that. I'd like to delve into just a little bit when you were sat at the top or near the summit of Kilimanjaro, and to use your phrase, having your princess moment, sat down, and then just having that thought come into your head, okay, one step in front of the other. Who else was there around you? Was there anyone picking you up?
Yeah.
What was that? Just paint that picture for me of what that scene was like and what was going on in your head.
So part of the challenge with all of this is that so it was my gig, right? So I'd organised the whole thing, and that started the year before. So that, you know, as well as everything, as well as climbing the mountain, there's organising 30 people to get from London to Tanzania, right? There's organising training sessions, there's organising trips to the altitude centre, making sure everyone's got their kit. One of the things that happened, where originally I signed up for the marathon, I signed up for the bike ride, I signed up for Kilimanjaro. Originally, it was just going to be me. So I was signing up to groups that were doing this, right? So, you know, there are companies out there that offer this. And when I realised there were so many joining me, we ended up removing ourselves from that and organising it all ourselves. So I had a band of merry men. There were 4 of us that all chipped in and dedicated a lot of time to getting that organised. You know, so there's a pressure over time when, you know, you're responsible for this madness that weighs on you. And so when I was sat there, not only was there it was like a fatigue of everything that had gone on, and you know, I sat there, and it was with my now wife at the time, my girlfriend, sort of sat down with me for a moment. We had a very brief conversation, and there was definitely let's suck it up, Jamie. This is it. This is your doing.
This is what she said to you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's why she's now my wife, right? Because sometimes you need that in life and business at the top of a mountain, and yeah, we refer back to that all the time. We also refer back to where I was suffering from altitude sickness coming down, and it was quite slippy. Me making some reference to, you know, they've not really thought about health and safety up here, have they? As he stands there atop of Africa's highest mountain. Yeah, I may have been slightly wide of the mark there.
That is so interesting. So my wife is quite similar. It sounds like to what your wife is like. Is that there will come a point, and she'll just tell you the truth.
Yeah,
and in a blunt way, suck it up. I think it's just great phrase.
Yeah,
because that's really the only thing you've got to do, right?
Well, and also when you're there, what are my options? Right. So
no helicopter's going to come and rescue you.
No. Although some of my friends from West London, we did get one day down the mountain, and they, you know, it looks quite level in certain parts. And then there was one of them who sort of went up to one of the guys there and said, "Are we too high up to get a taxi?" I'm like, you do know it took us 5 days to get up here. Again, everyone blames altitude sickness. You know, others might call it wishful thinking. But yeah, I think that brutal truth at times is needed. You know, it's not always the right tool to go in with. But I think, you know, when you know someone as well as you do, you know, or when someone knows you as well as that, they know when that's the tool to use. And yeah, you know, the option was either carry on for 20 minutes, summit Kilimanjaro, take the glory, get the photo, tick the box, or what? Turn around and go down. That's just as painful, you know. So why not have the good pain, right? Why not celebrate and feel it in 20 minutes' time, as opposed to, I mean, crikey, can you imagine the regret? Yeah, I organised this band of 30 of us and only 29 summited. I threw a hissy fit and decided not to do the last 20 minutes. So, yeah, I'll be forever grateful that wasn't the decision I made.
Choose your pain, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So it's interesting as well, that point that you've covered, which is to do with the relationship and the ability to deliver that hard and tough message that, you didn't just meet her at that time. She wasn't just someone that was, a distant colleague or
No.
a friend. You would have had experiences together and moments together that would have enabled you to trust her judgment,
Yeah.
and her to feel confident in delivering that tough message to you.
And I don't think that that's why we sit here with two kids and recently married, although we've been together 15 years. We got there eventually, but it was always going to be the case. But I think we need in life, we need the brutal truth more than we know. I think there's a lot of blowing smoke that goes on in business, in life. Sometimes you need those hard truths, because then once you know once you realize the truth, once that truth has been delivered to you, you can make decisions. You can then decide what's the right step forward, what is the right next move. And I'll always be grateful for that. But again, these are all sort of lessons that you pick up along the way, and in every facet of your life, you end up using them subconsciously a lot of the time. And it's only when you sit in front of people like you start to realize, actually, those by asking those questions, you realize where those characteristics that you use regularly throughout your life now, they were born somewhere. These are not things that everyone's sort of innately, or characteristics that they have. They're characteristics that are learned, and they're reactions to the things that have happened.
How does this show up for you then with the team that you lead in your organization? It's because the houses and the properties that you develop and that you build, they're not your kind of postage stamp type of properties, and they're not a rinse and repeat style where there's a house type and you just repeat. You all know what you're doing because you've done it 50 times before. How does that show up for you?
Yeah, so there is none of that. Yeah, that rinse and repeat. I do a lot of networking in groups. I'm part of a mentoring and coaching group as well, where I mentor a few other construction businesses, and they have that. They do multiple plots, right? We don't. Everything is bespoke. Everything's one-off, and with that, it's exciting. We get to work on some of the most luxurious houses in the UK. We've operated in and around Belgravia, Mayfair. We listed buildings, blue plaques, heritage sites. We're working down in Sussex at the moment on a 16th century farmhouse. Where we're uncovering sort of artifacts within the building that have been there hundreds and hundreds of years, and it becomes our job then to preserve them. That's exciting. That nod to history is exciting. And, I would struggle to then turn around and say, right, there's 18 houses that are all going to be exactly the same. I want 18 front doors and, 102 windows. But it doesn't come without challenge. And actually, I would say it's a lot more difficult doing what we do, in the sense that the expectation is still that you're going to work to program, that you're going to work within a budget. Now, often the budgets are more flexible because people don't buy listed buildings, or they don't buy houses in Belgravia if they can only afford a postage stamp. But therefore, expectations are high. And so it can be quite a pressured environment. And I know everyone in construction will say that, but we have very few clients. So that pressure manifests itself in a different way, because we'll have 4 or 5 projects on at a time. We don't tend to take on more than that. And as we grow, what's happened is that we've taken on bigger, larger projects, not more, because clients' demands and clients' expectations remain the same, whether you're on a £1 million project or a £5 million project. They get no less of a service at £1 million than they do at £5 million, and that's something we need to ensure, and that they expect, and rightly so. And so, look, we're a fairly lean team, and we're purposefully so. What that means is we're a really tight knit group. We're communicating every day, multiple times a day, and when challenges arise, that communication and those tight-knit relationships, they're the things that get us through. And I use lots of the phrases I've used here today with you are what we use in business as well. What's the next right thing to do? Yep, things have gone slightly wrong there. The design that we received didn't quite work out, but someone's decided to go ahead with it anyway. We've got to retro this now. What's the next right move? And so I apply that, like, whenever I find myself, we all have our head in hands moments. Whenever that happens, once I've got over myself in my personal life and in business, it's just that one question. What's that one step? What is it? And I think now the shorthand we have within the team is that everyone kind of takes that approach. So everyone's like, let's not think about the end of the project, because sometimes that's too far away and it's too abstract to talk about in a meaningful way. But if you can think about what's the next right step to take you along the way, what's going to be the momentum builder for us and to get us back on track. And so, having a close-knit team, having lines of communication that are open every day, and that, we're a fairly flat organization in terms of there's not layers and layers of management. There are some, but I will have a direct line to the guys delivering the projects on site. I'm still turning up on site and working with the guys and sort of, often asking what they need, often asking what we can be doing better. So, my operation sits, or, my role sits at that level, whereas I have a team delivering the projects and schemes for us. But I used to think when I started in construction that, you'd use words like culture. And it's culture, it's this building, this is construction. What do you mean culture? I was an idiot, right? So those things matter. You need to set the standard, you need to set the tone, and you need to consistently do that. And then culture starts to become a thing. It starts to become a living, breathing thing within your business. And we're seeing that now. And I have a coach that I work with, and talks, and they're constantly talking about culture, constantly talking about what are the standards you set within the business for yourself. How you do anything is how you do everything. It's quite a common phrase, and that's on the wall in the office, and that goes for the guy that's site labourer, to the guy that's the managing director, to the guy that's head of ops. What are the standards that we set? And I think a lot of that comes down to a bit of it's not always been a straight line. There have been lots of struggles. We've had bad jobs, we've had challenging clients, we've had good years, we've had average years, we've had not so good years. One step in front of the other. The North Star's there, so we know what we're aiming for, and it won't always be a straight line. So get to the back of the top of that mountain, one foot in front of the other, 20 minutes to the top. And if we keep reverting back to that, I think we'll get there.
You talked to me about sustainability, net zero, and how that shows up with the requests that are coming from your clients.
Yeah, it's a hot topic in our office, actually, and with our delivery partners, architects, interior designers that we work with. There are different levels of clients that we work with. So there are clients that are ultra high net worth. They have a budget for the project, but that's what they want to spend. It's not what they can spend. That's very different to some of our other clients who we've got one project at the moment where, due to a death in the family, someone's inherited a lump of money, and with that they want to build their own house. But it's a finite pot, right? So they're not pulling from their investments. This is it, and so by having those different, by having the different wealth profiles, I don't know if that's a thing. It changes the conversation around sustainability. I think, given the option, everyone would say yes, right? So how can we be more sustainable in anything that we do around the built environment? Is it a good thing? Absolutely. Can I afford it? Maybe not. And I think that's the challenge we find. And this doesn't just, I'll slightly stray from the sustainability question. but keeping that in the rear view here, you know, I'm finding more and more cost expectation around what is being designed and what it costs to build that design is getting further and further apart. There's too many times now where, so, you know, as we look to grow, you know, we're working with new architectural partners. And what that means is we inevitably we have to tender. So we go competitively up against other contractors, and we, you know, we'll tender as everyone else. We'll produce our tender documentation, our returns. And there's been a few over the last year or so, you know, we get the feedback and we're like, you're too expensive. Oh, crikey. That's strange. I thought I thought I'd done pretty well on that. So how far out am I, like, compared to the other guys, the other tendering parties? And, oh no, you're all too expensive. I'm like, oh no. So then that's being expensive is not the problem. You've designed something that, you know, if four contractors are all saying it's going to be this much within 10%, that's the cost. And I think you can liken that a lot to sustainability. Unfortunately, a lot, because we do a mix of, we're probably 60-40 in terms of more retrofit than we do new build. New builds are picking up now, and sort of taking a slightly larger share, but historically that's what we've done. Retrofit is tricky. It's not always straightforward. Some of the technologies that are put forward aren't entirely suitable for retrofit. You know, we had one fairly recently where we've installed so it was a large extension, a big 8-bedroom house, you know, swimming pool and all that good stuff, but with air source heat pumps. There wasn't much talk about insulation. You know, we improved insulation slightly, and, you know, maybe we didn't advise accordingly at the time, or, you know, the MEP consultant didn't really consider that, and then the clients got in there and froze. This isn't great. This isn't what I was expecting, you know. So there's an education challenge there. But it's, where does it fall on the priority list for the client is what I would ask. For some, it's top and they'll pay it. And they've researched and they know what it's going to cost. We know we want that. We want PV here. We want air source heat pumps here, ground source heat pumps. You know, a lot of retro insulation happening, which is great, you know, because, you know, from my experience, that's sort of your belt and braces. So I get that right first and then follow on with the tech. But for a lot, it's a nice to have still. And you know, it needs to be mandated for it to have to happen, because it's an easy one to substitute out. Every tender goes through a value engineering phase. Yep, okay, you've come back at £1 million. We need to get this to 800. What can we do? You know, so everyone gets there, start sharpening their pencil. But, you know, there are some easy wins, right? Let's try and, you know, do we need the ground source heat pumps? Oh yeah, we really wanted it. I can save you 40 grand. Yeah, I'll tell you what, let's go traditional. Let's get a gas boiler in. And it's such an easy thing to do. My feeling is, until it's mandated, until it's compulsory, we're going to keep bumping up against these things. It's certainly in the retrofit. New builds are different, of course. We're working on one at the moment where it's not passive house. We're going close to, and that's exciting. Clients are fully invested. Architect is all over that, you know, and it's every time we're suggesting a new product or material, we're like back to the design and making sure that we're going to get as close as we possibly can. And that's great, because with new build, that's the expectation. And, you know, it's a blank canvas to a certain degree. But retrofit is a challenge. And retrofit on a heritage building is an even bigger challenge. We're still installing the farmhouse that we recently completed. You know, there's lard and plaster walls going back in. You know, so, you know, there's no insulation in a lot of these buildings. We've improved where we can, but it's a challenge. And, you know, there's other things we can talk about. You know, talk about waste. Talk about the amount of waste within the industry. What I see on site makes me shudder. You know, what gets thrown away and not recycled. But there's a cost to all of it, and it's like who bears that cost? Tough economic climate. You know, and I feel like we're always saying that, to be honest. But they're the thing. You know, in those environments, it's just too easy for that to be pushed to one side. And I think my feeling is until things are compulsory, until we don't have a choice, until building controllers saying, well, you're not getting signed off until X, Y, and Z. And I know there's new legislation coming in, and that is all happening. But I feel like the retrofit side of things, which is where there's more of that happening than there is of new builds being built. We've got this existing stock, and if we're going to talk about sustainability, there's so much stock out there, that's empty, that's derelict, that could be brought back to life. So we're not using new concrete. We're not putting more into the environment. We're using what's already there. There's whole conversations to be had around that too.
Definitely. It sounds as though that even if it becomes a mandatory thing, that the actual projects are not going to be viable if the costs aren't right.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so important for organizations like yourself to get the right advice from the right organizations, and also maybe not put, it sounds like from what you're saying that there's clients that have done loads and loads of research, that's their bag, that's their thing, and they're coming to you with either a shopping list and also like the instructions of how to put that shopping list together so that they can get the outcome that they want. But I think that's where the industry has an opportunity to improve, is how do I get my cake and eat it?
Mm.
How do I get a sustainable building and to be able to afford it without someone breathing down my neck and saying, unless you do this, then this building's not going to be viable?
Yeah. So there's some changes around planning, about the affordability of planning, right? So because what's happening an awful lot, and it's overwhelming planning departments all over the country. They're massively understaffed anyway. And that's all these unviable projects, that they get put in for planning. They go through the system. They sit on someone's in someone's inbox until 7.5 weeks, and for the last half a week it gets reviewed, and some are like, yep, right, you've got the planning, and then it goes to get priced, and it never gets built. Right. So there's some of the changes coming around are talking about having a cost a cost assessment as part of the planning application. So before, so they, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, get the cost assessment of what it is they're putting in for planning, and it says this is going to be £1 million, and they say, I've only got £500,000, and I've seen expectations and actual costs be misaligned by as much as that in the past. They won't put that in for planning. Why would you? Why pay the fee? So I think there is some benefit to that then allows sort of things to get built. It doesn't change the affordability of it, but what it might do, it's certainly speed up the planning process, which can be a good thing. And there's probably a whole other podcast about that to be had. But what can we do? Like it's almost we've got a sustainability schedule, which is essentially a checklist. So what are the things we can do that aren't going to cost the earth? And it's a bit like one step in front of the other, right? So it doesn't need to be the all singing, all dancing passive house solution. What are the improvements we can make? And as I mentioned before, just insulating a house properly will make such a difference. Right? And turning the thermostat down just slightly will make an impact. But education across the board is lacking. It's everyone's we have to pick this up and run with it ourselves. There's no one telling us to do it. The architects we work with tend to be those that are sustainability conscious, that are eco-friendly. And that's great because that aligns with us. That's why we're delivery partners. But I think there's what we try and do is offer early cost involvement. So with some of the delivery partners we work with, we don't tender for work, so we'll be introduced and we'll negotiate projects, and that's great because we can offer loads of value then, especially around these areas that we talk about here. So we can say we've got ground source heat pump, air source heat pump, PV panels, battery storage, insulation, rainwater harvesting, all of these things. We've done it. We can we can back cost. We can back cost these things and say, look, here's roughly what if you go for ground source over air source, here's what it's going to cost. If you give that to them before they've designed it into the building and they've sunk £15,000 in design fees with an architect and an MEP consultant. If they can have those conversations early, I think more gets built, because, if that's important to them, then there's other areas within a building you can save money. But if it happens at the end when they've got their planning and it's a certain footprint and the facade needs to look a certain way and they have to use a specific roof tile, if it's that point that you're trying to retrofit costs and sustainable elements of the building, they're not going to change the building. They're not going to go back through planning for it to find the savings. So if you have the cost conversation earlier, I do think we would be able to work with clients and architects to include more of these sustainable elements in all the buildings we do. But, there's the challenge with construction. People like to tender because they will have sweeping and varying costs, and people will take £100,000 risk because it's cheaper. It costs the same to build the building, no matter who's doing it. We don't have access to super cheap labour anymore here in the UK. There were periods when, those coming over from Europe would offer super cheap labour. It doesn't exist anymore. Materials, post-COVID, materials went up. Timber stabilised, everything else stayed where it was. That's it. They're not going down. So it costs the same to build it. So engaging the experts in doing that, namely us or another like us, talking about your wish list as you would with an architect or in conjunction with that architect, and actually saying, right, for us to do this, it's going to cost that. Retrofitting doesn't need to be exactly that. It can be thought about and it can be built into any project. But, until we're having that conversation early, I feel like we're going to keep struggling with these things.
Definitely. That's one of the things that we as a consultancy will talk to our clients about. And also the ones that we're trying to get as our clients is to you need to get us in early. We understand about the M&E. We understand the fabric. But if you just understand about the M&E, you, just like you're saying there, you're going to miss the fabric element. You're going to deliver something which is less than ideal, because there is no one silver bullet.
No.
The thing that I talk to people about is developing a property, a sustainable property, is almost like making a really good chocolate cake, if chocolate's your thing.
Yeah.
It's not the chocolate that makes the chocolate cake. It's how the chocolate interacts with the egg and the flour, how it interacts with the baking process and the mixing process. There's lots of different elements, and it's about bringing those elements together in the right way to give you the output that you're after, as opposed to just saying, I just need to go and get the best chocolate.
Yeah. So sticking with cake, we went through before coming to speak to you today, I went through some of our projects and looked at those conversations around sustainability. 70% of the sustainable elements on any of those projects over the last 8 years got removed at value engineering stage. Now let's do that with cake. If you take the egg out, what are you left with? It's not nice. There's lots of vegans out there. I've tried the cake. It's not good.
Doesn't taste the same.
No, not my thing. But the rule applies. 70%, that's loads, right? So people go in there with 70% more intention to do something good, to be sustainable, to implement this into their projects. And only 30, and 70% of them end up with something different. There's lots around cost as well to be spoken about. I think technology will drive costs down over time. I think, looking at battery storage and costs starting to, it's always been super expensive to do that in a meaningful way. We did a project out in Surrey on another farmhouse. It had quite a large array, had a big field, and it was quite early. This was a number of years ago now, quite early on with battery storage. So expensive and makes it prohibitive to a lot of people. As these things come down, we'll be able to do more. And as technology advances, I don't even know where AI takes any of this or what impact it would have. But I'm sure that's a future episode for you somewhere down the line.
There's lots in AI that's going on across the industry. But one of the things that I think would be really, really useful from an AI perspective, just going back to the house that you're mentioning, which is near to Passive House, is that I've seen a number of occasions where people have built a passive house, but they've not been able to transfer how to live in a passive house to the occupants of the house.
Right.
And so the occupants have just not used the house in the way that it's been designed,
Yeah.
got frustrated with it,
Yeah.
and so lived in the property completely contrary to how it's designed.
Yeah.
And so there is that education piece as well,
For sure.
that needs to happen.
So we have that across, not just in houses, but passive house, but different types of heating, for example.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes people have never had underfloor heating, right? They feel it, they treat it like a radiator, like it's a spot heating solution. Oh, it's cold, let's stick the underfloor heating on, as if all of a sudden it's going to warm. It's a passive heat that will build up over time. You keep the temperature low, but you keep it consistent. Your boiler's not ramping up and ramping down. But if people aren't shown how to operate that, I mean, it's quite a basic example, but
It happens. Yeah, you're right.
and it's the same as the project I mentioned with the air source heat pump. Didn't really have those conversations at the time, and this was a number of years ago now. And to be fair, we weren't super experienced. We hadn't done many of them, and this was the biggest house that we'd done with it, with an air source heat pump, and again floor heating throughout. And I remember going there after we have a 12 months defect period.
Right.
So you go back to make sure everything's okay, and we have to do this. Often some things we need to pick up. Door handles aren't sticking, and it's just to make sure that what we've done is going to stand the test of time. I remember going in there, and it was sort of, I think it was springtime. It's a little bit chilly outside. And as I've gone and met the client, he's in his office like with a full-on fleece on. I was like, "This is what I'm like all the time." I'm like, "Yeah, we really should have insulated those walls, shouldn't we?" But again, cost-saving exercises, but end up trumping practicality. But it's education actually over and above all of that. So it's our job, if we can get in there early enough, to have those conversations. We've got someone within the business, who will take that lead for us. Maybe she should have been on the podcast, but Nicola will take the lead and work through our sustainability schedule. Look at if it's actually feasible. Look at what those cost savings might be, and that's great. But for us, it's about how do we get in there early enough. With delivery partners that we work with consistently, that's fine. But, during that whole tender process where it's a bit of a beauty contest, or sometimes a race to the bottom, it is challenging to get in there early enough. And I'm sure you have the same challenge. You get brought in after the contractor's been appointed, and they're all foundations are in the ground. We should really think about her M&E and sustainability. Yeah, and it's like, like 6 months ago would have been the right time. The next best time is now, but you may have missed the opportunity to do certain things at that stage.
But it's also, just bringing it back to your experience at the top of Kilimanjaro, is choose your pain. So the pain is, well, I can save myself, in inverted commas, 40 grand by not doing this, or 100 grand, or however much it is for insulation. And I can sit there and walk back down the mountain, but then I've got the pain living with me forever of me being in my study or in my office or in the orangery or whatever it is, overdressed. So it's choose your pain.
It is, but it's also even being aware that there's going to be some pain. I think that, go back one step, like this chap, I don't think he was aware. And, we weren't back then. Yeah. We weren't either, really. We blindly follow what's set in front of us, and we wouldn't do that again. But it's being aware that there's going to be some pain. Which one is up to you, but you're absolutely right. So choosing your pain or poison now, and being happy with the up and down the line. I mean, most of our clients, the money they spend with us is the largest single amount of money they're going to spend on anything in their entire lives. Not all of them. Those that knock about in Belgravia probably do this all over the world in their various estates. But, a lot of our clients, this is it. So you want them to get it right.
It's going to be a legacy for them. It's going to be
absolutely for their children.
Make a difference.
And also, if you look at things like BREEAM and you look at other sustainability methodologies, if a house has been built to those standards, it will also hold more value. Down the line, it will mean more as well, because there will be increased legislation, there will be increased compliance, and that will require So when people are selling houses, that's going to be, like your new alloys on your car. Oh, you've got your new alloys. Oh, that's another $4,000, whatever it's worth. Now translate that to their property.
But people are also going to understand, just in the general public, what these different certificates and different standards actually mean. It's going to have meaning.
Yeah.
Where now it's like, well, I don't really quite get it. When I first set the company up back in 2007, everybody thought I was bonkers, leaving a very well-paid job to come and set up in an industry that wasn't established, that no one really knew and understood. But now, looking back on the decision that I made in 2007, I don't think I can find anybody that I speak to and say, look, this is my consultancy, this is what we do. No one says, well, yeah, I don't think that there's any legs in that. I don't think.
Yeah.
But back in 2007,
yeah.
And so I think that moving forward, 2030, 2035, 2040, buildings that have got a certain standard when it comes to sustainability, I don't think they're going to be looking back and saying, oh, 2025, I shouldn't have built it this way. I should have done something different.
No, you're right. Yeah. And that 40 grand will seem like money well spent, right? So, I completely agree. And you just have to look at, whilst it's never fast enough and the adoption is never quick enough or absolute enough, you only have to look at where we've come since 2007 to where we are now. Where it sits among the zeitgeist, where it sits amongst people's priorities. It's increasing. It's never enough. It's never quick enough, but it is increasing. And, like I say, in this group, this coaching group that I'm part of, every Monday morning, there's about 40 construction businesses that sit on a call. And we talk about our challenges and our problems. And, you bring your challenges to the group and we discuss it. And, hopefully people get to take away a solution or some ideas as to how they might solve a problem. Sustainability is coming up all the time. Those conversations. A lot of it's around differentiation, actually. How do we set ourselves apart from Joe Blogg's builder? And sustainability is something that's spoken about a lot. A huge bugbear of mine is the greenwashing element of it, or the soundbite element. Going onto your website and there's a couple of paragraphs. What's the action behind that? And so, within our business, we've set out our own internal mandate. Here, every job, here's what we're going to do. And as a bare minimum, it's the sustainability schedule that we create for every project. And sometimes we do that just in-house. Sometimes we'll do that with the appointed consultant. But then having the opportunity to sit down and talk to a client about it, and really trying to educate them as to why this makes sense and why don't do option 10 if you haven't done options 1, 2, and 3. You're going to be disappointed when you've got your fleece on in your living room. So let's do 1, 2, and 3. And being practical about solutions and genuinely bringing that to our clients. And, we have those meetings ahead of time. Nicola will lead those and the delivery team will support her in those. But that's how we're trying to differentiate. The retrofit market, the renovation market, that's a tricky one to crack when it comes to sustainability. But if we don't try, we won't crack it. So we've got to keep trying, and we've got to take one step in front of the other. And that's what we're trying to do on a daily basis.
Love that. And I think that concept of one step in front of the other, it's never going to be quick enough.
We're not running up the mountain.
It's never
We're not running up the mountain. No, it isn't. It isn't. But what are the alternatives? And we go back to that once again. If we're not stepping forward, we're either standing still or we're going home. And neither of those two are an option.
Yeah. Jamie, it's been great catching up with you. I'm just wondering, just for the audience that we have got, if there's anything that you wanted to mention that we haven't discussed already, that you would like them to kind of go away with from this conversation that we've.
Yeah, look, one of the challenges I see across the coaching community I'm part of, and in the broader network, it leads very. It leads us to the conversation we're having today and lots of the things we've touched upon, is that those experts that are being employed to build these houses for you, to renovate these luxury houses for you, to renovate and retrofit these properties, you're employing these people because they're experts, because we are experts at what we do. And if there's one bit of advice that I wish I could have all clients heed, it would be whoever you're working with would be to engage early, to have those conversations way earlier, identify someone you'd like to work with, negotiate with them if you can. Tendering is a solution. Everyone wants to be competitive, but in my experience, what tendering tends to do in the market we're in is it ends up rewarding the contractor that made the most mistakes, right? The contractor that didn't understand a drawing or missed something out or played a game with provisional sums. And the reason it's important in this context is because, if you go through that full design phase and you're already designing your interiors and then your contractor's brought on, the ability to talk about sustainability has almost vanished. So engaging early, having those conversations, at the very beginning, identifying that contractor, that person to work with, that consultant to bring in, as early as possible will get you the best outcome. And we benchmark our projects, and those where we have been able to engage early has allowed us to enter into those and deliver projects with more of those sustainable elements remaining in scope and not getting scratched out in red pen at the value engineering stage. Leaving that too late removes that opportunity. And I feel like if you're responsible for the renovation or build of a house or a property, I think we kind of all have a duty of care, and that's the clients included, to really look at sustainability, really look at what we're doing within our homes and the way that we live in order to benefit the environment and the world we live in. I do think there is a duty of care to start having that very important conversation much earlier, and I think the outcomes will be much better for everyone.
I love that. I share that sentiment 100% myself. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Because there is more you can do. I love metaphors, but I know that you like cars. If you drive and just focus your sight at the end of the bonnet, then your steering is going to be really erratic. The chances of you crashing is really high.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're going at speed. If you lift your eyes up and look to the horizon, your driving is going to be less erratic. So you're going to be able to drive quicker.
Yeah.
And everyone, I'm sure, remembers the experience when they first started to drive and the panic and, I'm going so fast. You look at the thing and you're doing 15 miles an hour, but it feels like you're flying. Is the eyes were focused down at the end of the bonnet when you first started to drive. And it's only through experience that you lift those eyes up and you realize that you're able to take in more and do more by looking further forward, which is exactly the point that you made, is get involved early because you've got sight further down the road.
Absolutely. And you can correct direction, you can correct course, very easy. That 1 degree to the left or the right early on makes a significant difference by the time you get to your destination. I completely agree.
Joe, it's been great having you on the podcast.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Good.
Thanks for watching to the end. I think that you'll like this, but before you do that, just make sure that you've commented and liked below, and also that you've subscribed.